So thank you everyone for coming along today. This is our Authentic Voice webinar, and we're hoping to kind of give you an idea of how to embed that lived experience into your work. So next slide, please, Chris, and we'll just go through some housekeeping. Essentially for this session, we want to just assume best intentions. So any conversations that are going on in the chat, it's always better to ask questions. Anything that's unclear or troubling, have those open conversations. We want to remember that no one has all the information. I also want to remind you all just to take care of yourself. We won't be talking about any particulars around domestic abuse, but we still need to be mindful of that. So if you need to take a step away, please do. And whilst you're here, if you can be as present and as engaged as you can be, I understand that we're all very busy though. So I know that we're all, especially on our laptops, have Teams and things like that and emails popping up in the background. We will be recording today's webinar. So this will be shared with you once it's available, and we can send that out along with the slides as well. So in terms of the chat function, please use this as an interactive session, asking questions, just mindful of being respectful. And you can type questions in there. So we will try and answer those as we go through, because one of us might not be talking, whilst the other one is. If we miss questions, we're also going to compile them and take them away. We give feedback afterwards. And if we've got time, we will have a Q&A session at the end. And in terms of accessibility, you can access the captions button at the bottom of the screen. So in case the volume's not great for you, there's the little CC button at the bottom of the screen. And that's everything for me for the housekeeping, I think. So about us, just quickly, we are SafeLives. We are a UK-wide charity. So the aim of SafeLives is to end domestic abuse for everyone and for good. We do a lot of work with local areas, and we are independent from any statutory bodies. So we are practical led. So for example, I'm from the practice team, and we have experience being frontline, and now we've come to work at SafeLives and trying to embed all of our knowledge from that frontline practice into supporting other services, basically to embed best practice. We also work alongside our innovation team, which Chris is part of. So he is the senior innovation lead. They basically hold all of our pioneers and our lived experience within that team. So our pioneers and our change makers. We want to have survivor voice at the heart of all of our thinking, and at the heart and start of our projects. So like I say, we work across the UK with organisations. We do loads of different projects. So you will have come across us, particularly in Bolton, Leicestershire and Sheffield, doing some public health approach previously. And now we're obviously here doing ECHO. We've also got other projects going on in the areas as well, such as children affected by domestic abuse, which has embedded domestic abuse programmes for racially minoritised communities. Next slide, please, Chris. So I've kind of gone through a lot of that in terms of what we do practically, but how we kind of do that, we put that voice of survivors at the heart of everything we do. So particularly with the project that we're currently working on with ECHO, we've had pioneers and change makers work with us right from the start of this project in terms of setting it up, in terms of interviewing the services that we're working with on the project, and they're also going to be involved throughout every stage. So we innovate and we test projects. So again, we do lots of pilots at SafeLives, and we really like to partner work with services, and we combine all the data that we tend to gather from like our Marrocks across the UK, and we have a really strong research team as well. So we always want to back up everything we're doing with that real data and research led, then that practical knowledge and also the voice of lived experience. We turn all of this into training, and like I say, we roll out a lot of guidance around domestic abuse. So today's agenda, we'll be going through the journey of authentic voice within SafeLives, just so you've got a background of what we mean when we're saying authentic voice. We'll be talking about the benefits of embedding that lived experience within your work. Culture change, which is just so important when we're looking at authentic voice, and how are we going to truly embed this in a safe and appropriate way. What opportunities can you offer as a service, as an area? And then we'll be talking about the implementation of that authentic voice as well, just to give you some of those practical skills towards the end, just so that you can take that away and try and implement that in your own services. Cool. So we'll dive into it. So from authentic voice to the ECHO project, and this just give you some background on what we're here about today. So what is authentic voice? We always start with this quote from Ursula, one of our pioneers. We've walked through fire to get our voices back, and we're not going to give them up now. It's just such a powerful quote. And Ursula has been with Safe Lives for such a long time and has really pioneered that authentic voice element within our work. We're really committed to having that lived experience within our projects to make our projects more authentic. We really value that expertise, and we know that there's no us or us and them essentially with the way that we work. There's a lot of lived experience within Safe Lives, as we know there's lots of lived experience out there as well with lots of other professionals. So we're always really mindful of how we're working with each other, how we're creating those safe spaces in order to really kind of elevate the practice that is going on in the UK. So we want to know as well, in terms of that lived experience, not only is authentic voice about the survival experience, it is also about that professional experience and that practical knowledge. We want those on an equal footing. And I think that's what's really important as well about authentic voice. It's about having that kind of 360-degree view on what's going on. And it really improves that response from services. And they then respond to what the survivors need locally. Next slide, please, Chris. So this is the development of our authentic voice journey within Safe Lives. So in 2016, there was a first fully co-created survivor-led event. This really led to kind of more visibility, more influence, more connections. And as you can see, it started from a kind of friends, family and survivors group. Because we've also wanted to hear that family voice, those friends of survivors, and having that survivor voice. Wasn't the best named project, we're aware, and that's why we've kept it that way around. We haven't even censored ourselves, but that is the name of the group initially. That then moved on to pioneering. So that was a name that was decided by the survivors that were working with us at Safe Lives. And that's because they want to pioneer the way. They want to be that kind of leading voice in improving services for survivors of domestic abuse. We needed to start that from the inside out. So we are trying our best to, walk the walk as well as talk the talk. We know it's a journey, however, lots of things are always changing and improving. And, once you know better, you do better, essentially. After the pioneers were embedded, we developed our authentic voice strategy, which was really embedding those values into our culture, into our DNA, kind of making sure that this was the place where you can bring your whole self to work if you feel able to and if you feel that you want to. Equally, you don't have to, and there's no judgment on how anyone wants to express themselves and their experiences within Safe Lives, and that's something we really want to cultivate here. We then developed the AB principles and the toolkit. So in terms of that toolkit, it was around really having that guidance behind what we mean by authentic voice. How are we doing this? How do we think that's the best way to do it? That was co-created with pioneers and with changemaker input. So changemakers are our young people as well. And so it's just around giving practical tools to help us internally, but also to help us develop guidance externally and when we go into local areas to really support how they can embed that authentic voice. And then aiding local governance and practice, we've developed different kind of strings to our work where we're working with local areas to develop that authentic voice model. We know lots goes on in local areas, but sometimes it's often just not kind of joined up. We're also doing work in a few local areas around the UK as well as the ones that we're in now with Bolton, Leicestershire and Sheffield. We're also doing other work where we're setting up survivor voice panels, and Chris will talk about that a little bit later. So, next slide, please. So this is the model that we have within Safe Lives. And we represent this as a triangle because we have right at the top that real depth of voice. And that's, as I was talking about, the pioneers, our change makers, and our authentic voice panel, which is based in Scotland. And that's a smaller group of people with lived experience who can then really bring that depth to the work that we do. So with our projects, we will always reach out to the innovation team. So that's, like I say, where our pioneers sit within. And we will reach out to them to see if there is someone with lived experience who wants to work with us from the start of that project. They can then pick what and choose what they would want to do on that project. So what's interesting them, how involved can they be, and do they want to be around their own, work and lives as well. And it just really adds that another element to all the work that we do with all of their expertise that they're coming from with firstly their life experiences and equally that lived experiences as well. We've then got our experts by experience. So those are people that aren't necessarily pioneers and doing that more kind of campaign style work, but they are bringing their expertise to the work. So it could be that they are not necessarily giving talks and things, but they are working on bits of the project. They're doing bits of research with us. They're feeding in with their knowledge of what's gone on. And it brings it down in terms of that breadth of voice. We've got that community capacity building right at the bottom, which is where you are able to talk to a much wider cohort of survivors. So again, something that we really would like to be doing and achieving with Echo is having that opportunity for lots of people to be able to feed in a way that suits them. That can be surveys, that can be questionnaires, that could be attending focus groups and things, and just feeding into the work in those kind of smaller pockets and ways that feel achievable for them. Next slide, please, Chris. So these are our authentic voice principles. So I won't go into loads and loads of detail for each one because I think we can be here forever in terms of all the principles. However, we have do no harm, and that's around us really recognizing the impact that survivor voice will have. So it can occur if we're not asking for that experience, but it can also occur, if we do. So we need to be making sure that we're kind of properly risk assessing, ensuring that survivor feels safe and supported throughout that process. And we're having to do this in a trauma-informed way. We've also got expert by experience, so survivors and professionals bringing that knowledge. So that's what I was talking about us being on that equal footing, and really trying to remove those power dynamics within the room. Often, there's no them and us. We know that anyone can experience domestic abuse. And so we need to also ensure that survivors are valued and they're compensated for their expertise. So if they're coming and they're bringing their expertise, they should be paid, remunerated in a way that shows them that they are as valued in the room as professionals that are also there. Speak your truth. This really entails around how survivors are not spokespeople for the organisations that they're working with. So we are giving opportunities to survivors to bring their lived experience. That at times is going to be negative around the services maybe that they are working with, and that's okay. It can feel really scary, but that is an okay thing because that is how we grow. Survivors also choose what and when they want to share and who they want to share it with. So it might be that one day someone is very happy to share a lot of detail about an experience that they've had. It might be another day that that's absolutely not the right thing to do for them, and that's how we have to be flexible within that and agile to be able to respond to what that person needs at that time. We also need to know that survivors have to recognise their own impact on others. And so that's also about survivors being mindful of what they're sharing, how that impacts other survivors in the room, and also the benefit that can have, and equally, that might trigger someone else. So we always have to be mindful, and that's work that we do as well around with survivors in terms of what they're sharing. Have heart and start. So I've mentioned this, and it's really about having survivors right from the start of projects. We don't want to have that survivor voice kind of coming in at a random point, just really tokenistic, ticks a box. We've consulted with survivors. It's about creating that work together and not asking someone to rate it. Chris will go into the detail around how we manage the different levels of kind of that co-creation work. And I think it's really important to recognise that, that's fine, and there can be different levels, but we really want to be making sure that survivor work is fully planned out and thought about right from the start of projects, or before the project starts, if I'm honest, so that we've got the time factored in to do that properly. And equally, that they've got that their expectations are managed really as well, in terms of what the impact of that work's going to be and how that will kind of roll out. Equality and diversity, we need to ensure that we're hearing from all voices. So with Echo Project in particular, I know that we're really keen to hear from a really, really broad spectrum of people. Often we will hear from the same sorts of people who access services. So we really want to be able to reach into certain communities as well that don't necessarily access your mainstream services. We want to be able to hear from them as to why they don't feel that they're able to access those services. What about those services is unapproachable? Because that then helps us to make our services much more open and serving people that we want to serve. And finally, caring. So that's when we're all working together. We want to give choices in the support that survivors can receive. We also want to share that responsibility as well in terms of how a survivor looks after themselves. We're not infantilizing anyone. People know how to look after themselves. So it's about risk assessing together, finding out the best ways that they want to be supported. And then that's a nice, safely held place to be. Next slide, please, Chris. So our pioneers and change makers, they are at the heart of everything that we do here at SafeLives. They help us to be human, rigorous, and brave. And as I say, I think when we speak, as they said here, when we speak up, we're all empowered. You may well have attended a couple of lunch and learns or webinars that have been hosted by one of our pioneers, in particular for Echo. But if you've come across SafeLives before, we do often have our pioneers delivering training, and our change makers as well are often out there, here, there, and everywhere. And actually, when you hear them speak, it's so inspiring. It really makes me want to, drive to get the best in terms of services for people. Thanks, Chris. Next slide. And so this brings us to Echo Project. So this is a project that is currently rolling out in your areas at the moment. And some of you will know what it's about and others won't. So I will just quickly go over what we're trying to do with Echo in terms of authentic voice. We really want to deliver a sustainable model for embedding child and adult survivor voices in that design, in that delivery, creating pathways and developing support and services locally. We want to engage survivors to co-create and test solutions, and that will help everyone get the right support at the right time. And this will enable professionals as well, like working across that really broad section of society to help embed survivor voice. So we really want that system being shaped by the people that it's supposed to be working for. And in order to do this as well, it really helps decision makers to see how that change will positively impact that local landscape. With this project, we want to make it really clear that actually by investing in authentic voice, you are improving the system. It makes things probably much more better value for money than creating a service that doesn't necessarily fit the mold that everybody needs. And by that as well, in terms of that commissioning, you are then building those structures around the survivors that need those services. And then by moving forwards, it helps survivors as well on their recovery journey. That helps for many survivors really to be able to put an awful situation into something positive, to use those experiences to help others, and to walk alongside services who they know want to do good work. And we've come away from workshops where we've worked alongside survivors who've come and spoken in their local areas previously, where they've felt quite negative, for example, around how they viewed the system. But actually by being in a room with professionals who are there and committed and really care, they come away feeling much more empowered and really positive about what is out there, and that professionals do care. And so there's a real benefit on both sides there. Firstly, hearing that feedback, but equally seeing professionals really passionate about their job and working hard and listening. Right, next slide, Chris. I'm handing over to you.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with what Charlie's just been saying there about having, when we've done local area work and having survivors in the room with professionals and just understanding what those barriers have been. I think it's so important to build that partnership in there. It's fantastic when that happens, because a lot of the stigma attached to survivors is broken down, and a lot of stigma attached to the way in which professionals approach working with victims of domestic abuse. Those barriers are also broken down as well, because there's so much sort of toing and froing around people that work in the police, for instance, or court services. There's so much stigma attached to that, but that's often broken down when we sit everyone in a room and have that open conversation about what did it feel like for you, and what does it look like for you, and how can you do this better, and what can we do to make this work better for you. So it's a really, really good experience having groups of survivors in a room with professionals. So I'm just going to talk about some of the benefits of co-creation, some of the benefits of embedding lived experience as well. The first couple of slides centre around our Changemaker group, which, as Charlie sort of mentioned earlier on, are the young people that SafeLives work with. So we've got around 9 young people from the ages of 14 up to 22 22, I think, or 21 or 22, can't remember, sorry. And they work alongside us with regards to any sort of projects that they want to really, that they're interested in. We'll talk about sort of what that participation looks like for them. And I'm going to show you a video in a little minute, but just the importance and the real experience of working alongside children, young people, and certainly the group of change makers that we work with, then, you know, lived experience isn't the most important thing all the time. The lived experience of them not just being, you know, victims of domestic abuse or survivors of domestic abuse, but also of being young people, and they bring that alternative approach. So it doesn't always really depend on being, you know, a domestic abuse project as an example. Whilst we do that, their voice is really important because they are young people, and that co-creation is about young people. So it doesn't always have to be, I'm sort of going around the hours a little bit, but it doesn't always have to be around domestic abuse. There's the idea that they've got young person's voice is the most important, or is a really important part of this. So the importance of co-creation with young people, you find some alternative approaches. We know how young people are so creative and so dynamic with their thought processing sometimes. And as we as professionals sort of leave that arena of being young people, some people a lot longer than other people, but those approaches sort of leave us over a period of time. And those the approaches that young people bring are often alternative, they're creative, they're different, they're thought-provoking, and that can really improve that design of both research and of services. And engaging with other young people as well is a real bonus of how we get that word spread. So we often speak with our young people about engaging other young people. So we speak with our change makers about engaging other people in different area work. And that's a real bonus because young people will react to other young people as well. And if we've got that trust in our change makers to manage projects and to work alongside us and to get, you know, and to work alongside our principals as well and engage with other young people that aren't perhaps involved in change makers, we'll get that real sort of relationship built, and we can sort of build in that into the projects moving forward then. I'm just going to play it. So the approach that we take centers around something called Heart's Ladder of Participation. This is one of our change makers who's given us consent to share this video, which will explain Heart's Ladder of Participation. I'll then sort of just show you what it looks like and show you what it feels like. So I'll just play this. This is Maya.
So I was introduced to Heart's Ladder whilst working as a change maker when we were shown the model after a piece of work and asked for our opinion on where we thought we sat on the ladder. Since then, we've often used the ladder after pieces of work, certain meetings or projects as a way to reflect on our involvement in the co-creation process, how we felt about what we'd done and any changes we might want to make in future work. I think it's important to know that it's okay if not all pieces of work you do with young people sit at the top of the ladder, or if they're not all led or initiated by young people. The aim should be to get a balance of projects at different points of the ladder to ensure work is manageable and that young people also feel valued and heard across different areas of work. There will be times when there are restraints on young person involvement, and this is also fine as long as reasons for this are shared with them and as much as possible is done within those restraints to ensure they are still happy with their contribution and how their voice is being used. If I think back to the work that I've been involved with, there are examples that sit at all points of the ladder. Sometimes we as change makers are asked to review documents or social media campaigns, and this might sit closer to the bottom of Heart's Ladder because this might not be work that we were involved with throughout the process. Rather, we were informed at the end and asked to give an opinion on the final product. Work might also sit at the bottom of the ladder when past quotes, videos, or feedback young people have shared is used in different presentations or pieces of work. In these cases, we're helping to strengthen a cause without necessarily being directly involved in the new project. In these scenarios, we're always kept informed about what our contribution is. We are remunerated for that, and despite not sitting at the top of the ladder, we still feel valued because our expectations are managed and what we do contribute is still considered equally as important as some of the bigger projects we've been a part of. Sometimes there are projects that sit more in the middle of the ladder. These might be when the organisation has initiated a piece of research or work, but young people are then involved from the very start of the process and throughout to decide what that work will look like. For example, we have recently been working on a piece of work with City of London University called Too Soon Too Late. This was not a piece of work initiated by young people, but we were invited to be involved as soon as it was introduced, and we have been involved at every stage so far of the planning and delivery. Similarly, young people have been involved in planning this webinar from the very start and deciding what content we wanted to show you all today. Finally, there are projects that come at the top of the ladder, where projects are initiated and led by young people with decision-making shared with professionals. Recently, after recruiting more change makers, we decided as a group a topic of interest that we wanted to focus on. We decided on exploring the theme of intersectionality and co-created with SafeLives to research into this area and deliver something that we felt shared our voices and helped us to feel recognised and valued. Not every piece of work you do will be at the top of Heart's ladder, nor does it need to be. Instead, we're asking you to use the ladder as a tool to help you reflect on past pieces of work and plan future work. If you find that a lot of past work has been closer to the bottom of the ladder, then maybe consider implementing something new to include young people more in the co-creation process. Whether that's involving them earlier in the process, so rather than asking them to review a design, ask them from the start what they would want to see in the final product. Or it might be providing an opportunity for young people to feedback after a piece of work and suggest future areas of focus. A good practice, if you work with young people, is to show them Heart's ladder and ask them where they feel the work they have been involved with sits. We do this in our Changemaker meetings, and I find it allows for open conversations between young people and the professionals we're working with. Even the smallest change to a project can make a difference to a young person who may not always feel heard or that they have something valuable to contribute. Thank you.
So that was Maya, and what Maya really sort of explains really well is about this ladder. And if you haven't seen this ladder, this is Maya's version of the ladder. So there's loads of versions of Heart's ladder online. You can Google Heart's ladder and it will come up with lots. This was Maya changed some of the language around that, and this is where this sits now. And what's important, I mean, Maya's point around sort of utilizing the entire ladder is really key here, because whilst we don't want that sort of that manipulation and that decoration, we don't want to make young people feel that way, or for survivors and for survivors and young people to feel that way. You know, using Maya's video there was part of tokenism and decoration within this. You know, I worked alongside our young person's authentic voice coordinator to get consent. We're going to feed back on the impact of Maya's video, you know, so in theory, it's still fine to do. And Maya sort of talks through that, you know, reusing videos and explaining what that looks like and how that'll feel for her, and sort of completing that feedback loop with a bit of feedback as to the impact that had on her. That's okay. What's not okay is just using that in all the work that you do, because that's not helpful and that's not sort of co-production. That's not where we want to be. So Heart's ladder is really important, and you can be at different stages when you're doing pieces of work. What we'd rather it look like is around that co-production, partnership, and participation at the top end of the ladder. And the reasons for that is that there's initiation around young person's voice, there's initiation around survivor voice from the get-go, and we're going to talk through that a little bit later with regards to what that looks like, how you're going to plan into that, the sort of practicalities around what that might look like. There is room to consult, there is room to inform. What we know is, for example, funding bids come through, and they come through with outcomes and outputs that are already being looked at from local authorities or from, you know, government grants, those sorts of things. We want to talk about X, Y, and Z over here. So really, when you get something like that through, you can knock off the co-production and partnership out of the way, because it's not that side of things, it's that participation or consultation side of things. What we don't want to do is be around that manipulation and, you know, where we're utilizing voice and we're really thinking, right, okay, if we hear this voice over here, then that's going to improve our chances of getting further funding, or that's going to improve our chances of hearing different types of voice. We want to stay away from that sort of manipulation side of things as well. Okay, so have a little Google Hearts Ladder. It's dead interesting. There's lots of different versions. Some are a little bit more young person friendly. Some are a little bit more technical. There's lots of different sort of elements out there, but that's the one that we use. And Maya came up with that and changed some of the language around that. Okay. Just want to sort of quickly talk about the ecological model of support. So Brofenbenner's got an ecological systems theory, which you can go away and look at and sort of really think about. Because what he talks about is sort of structures and individuals being nestled in structures and what that looks like. And how we see sort of the ecological model within the work that we do is that whole picture approach. And if you think about the whole person, not just the person, but seeing and responding to all of that person. So, their background, any traumas, not just sort of addressing the issues that they present with, but really thinking about that extension of themselves, what that looks like. Then if you think about that structure of them within that family, what are the interactions within that whole family? Where do they sit? Are they siblings? Are they parents? Are they wider family that we can show support to or guidance? Think about sort of historical traumas. Where did they grow up? What did that feel like? What did that look like? Any mental health issues sort of historically, all those sorts of things. You've got to encapsulate that within the way in which we sort of hear their voice, the way in which we think about them as domestic abuse victims or survivors. Then we think about the whole community as well. So what does that community look like? How do we equip those communities? Where are they based? What is it like to get to them? What's accessibility like? What's their identity like? How do we move into and hear into the voice of those different communities? Then similarly go to that whole society as well. So challenging and deconstructing stereotypes, thinking of misogyny, thinking of the patriarchy, thinking of rural diversity, all those real sort of whole society issues that we don't always think about. And that gives us a much wider picture of what we call the whole picture approach. And that can transform, the way in which we see this is transforming the local response. And that will then branch out into that wider response around the country. And that's how we're going to stop domestic abuse together, which is what SafeLives want to do. So the ecological model is a really important model for us to think about. And whilst it's really hard to sort of, it's really hard to picture that as a whole, we're going to be doing these little bits at a time. So when we look to victims and survivors to hear their voice, when we talk to them about working alongside us with projects and stuff like that, we need to know about them as a person. They'll want to know about us as a service. We'll want to know a little bit of background about them as a family. They'll want to know a little bit about us, about our impartiality or what we might be using this piece of work for. So it works both ways with regards to how we build this ecological model into the way in which we're working. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of work that we're doing in local areas across the country. So there's lots of different pieces of work that are going on around the country from both practice team and the innovation team. Two of the areas that I want to concentrate on are using what we call panels and what we've been funded to do is to build panels within local authority areas. So that involves the interviews of panels, that involves getting out there and speaking to victims and survivors of domestic abuse, interviewing them, building them, getting sort of an idea of what they want from a panel, how they want to interact with a panel, what that feels like, and those sorts of things. And we've been doing one for about a year and a bit now, and another one for just under a year. And what we've established over the period of time is both panels in two different areas that meet on a monthly basis, and they've got 7 or 8 different people. And then on the side of that, they do little bits of work, stuff like that. We've also built into this offer experts by experience, which Charlie sort of mentioned earlier on, and we've been built into the collective as well. And what you've got there, we've got an authentic voice coordinator who manages these projects, and they will facilitate the panel every month. And they'll also be the liaison between the local authority or between any additional services or organisations that are being that are working with the panel for various things. The experts by experience have particular interests in particular things. One of them, in one of the areas, is around strategy. They're a strategist in business, and that's a real interest of theirs. So that's why they've been sort of brought in, and they want to talk about strategy implementation. And then we've got the collective as well, which sort of sits around. So if you think of it like a bit of a ball where the panel's in the middle and the collective sort of sits around the panel members. So they're victims and survivors that we've worked with that don't want to sit on a panel particularly, but want to use their voice to sort of initiate change and want to have their voice heard, but they don't, for whatever reason. And there's a multitude of reasons when it comes to time, whether it comes to what they're interested in, whether it comes to a bit of anxiety around being in groups, those sorts of things. So we use the collective, which sits outside the panel, to sort of think about specific consultation that the panel members might be working towards. And the work that we've started doing, or work we've been managing to do in the different areas, centers around strategy implementation. So in one particular area, the strategy has been completely rehashed. So when we think about sort of Heart's Ladder, this was really the sort of the mid sort of level, that consultation. They already had a strategy written. They wanted the panel to look at it, and they wanted feedback from the panel around what it looked like and what it felt like. And the work which went into it, I mean, it was phenomenal, really, in what sort of the outcomes have been, because basically there's been chapters completely removed from the strategy. The whole structure of the strategy has changed. The forward, which was written by the local partnership board director, has been scrapped and has been written by the victims and survivors that sit on the panel. So it's been written by the panel members now. There's so much that's gone into it. And the local authority have basically listened, and it's turned into a piece where it started off as that sort of that consultation. We'll ask them what they think, and then we'll either do something about it or we won't do something about it type thing. What they've actually done is they've taken it really seriously, and it's gone up and it's turned into a really co-produced piece of work, because they had some words, but those words are all getting rewritten because they're not making sense to the people that are going to read that strategy in the long term and the people that it's going to affect. So there's been a real sort of shift in that local area, and it's been brilliant to see. Some of the other work that the local areas have worked on, so they've looked at service delivery, sort of opportunities to change that service delivery and increase opportunity for victims and survivors to be heard. They've done some campaigning work. They've done loads of children and young people's work, and we're sort of working around building a framework for children and young people's panel implementation. So we're going to leave that area with a framework as to which will sit similar to some of the work that's done in ECHO. Sit around sort of that framework of how do we hear young people's voices, where are we hearing young people's voices, and what voices are we missing from those areas. We've done sort of focus groups around how to hear voices differently, and we're reaching into services not previously heard from, which I'll talk a little bit about later when I talk about sort of trauma-informed practice, because it's really sort of helpful. And in addition to that, we've also trained panel members, and the panel members are going to learn how to then train alongside some of the services and organisations in the local area. So we've been doing it for a year now and a little bit longer, and it's been a hard slog because you're picking up something from nothing. But it's absolutely fantastic work, and the changes that have been made in the local area with regards to culture, which Charlie's going to talk about in a minute, have been fantastic. But you have to be really open to that as a local area. And the last thing I just want to sort of touch on is what the dangers are of not listening to voices, not listening to victims and survivors, and not having lived experience within your implementation of services, within the work that you do. And one of our pioneers has written this, Shana, and she sort of talks about, there's no winners. Services and families both basically lose when you don't create services without listening to that experience. What it does is it reinforces stereotypes, it reinforces biases, it doesn't sort of give you that wider picture. You're missing opportunities for innovation. I spoke a little bit about young people being creative and having that different mindset to professionals, but victims and survivors have that as well. There is a continued lack of trust within local areas. You know, there's a lack of trust of having the voice heard. You send someone you do a piece of work with you do a parenting group as an example in a local area, and you give them a feedback form at the end that says, what did we do well? What didn't we do well? How can we do things differently next time? You know, your typical signs of safety stuff. You send that to a group of parents. They say, this was poor, didn't like this, quite like that, etc. But nothing changes. Nothing changes with that group. Then you're continuing that cycle of sort of lacking trust and lacking of change. We're also miscalculating risk. You're lacking understanding, and that all comes together with those ineffective solutions and back to the start where there's no winners and everyone loses. So it's really important that we think about how we really hear the voices of lived experience. Back to you, Charlie, I think.
It's back to me. And I think everything Chris was talking about there really highlights that need for that culture change. And we know that that's not a short-term piece of work, that's very much long-term. It can take 10 years to do proper culture change in areas, really, to be able to get to a point where you are just organically working with survivors. But what I want to take you into is a video around the Ubuntu philosophy. This was kind of brought to my attention by one of our pioneers, Annie. And so, yeah, we're just going to play this video for you now, and then we'll talk a little bit after that. Thanks, Chris.
Just so you know, this is around eight minutes long, so do get yourself comfy and do just, and just take it in and just sort of reflect on what's being said, 'cause it's a really good video.
There's this story from Ghana about, this young girl looking at his father who is peering into the past intensely. And the girl says, "Papa, you are always looking into the past. Why?" And the father looks at her and says, "My daughter, because the answers to the future always reside in the past." And that's where knowledges that are banished in the past, like Ubuntu, become relevant. The word Ubuntu comes from a Southern Guni word or phrase that says, "I am because you are because we are." In other words, as human beings, there's a sense in which there is some connection and interdependence. We rely on each other. Let me start by saying that Ubuntu is not a political program. I also want to add that it is not, a religious, expression. Ubuntu is about our social awareness, a consciousness of the others, a consciousness of the fact that we all have a responsibility to ourselves as human beings, especially the vulnerable among us. But perhaps more importantly, we also have a responsibility to, the world around us, the totality of our environment. Did you know that 30% of food crops in the world need cross-pollination from bees? These tiny insects. So if you are going to destroy the bees or the earth, you are ultimately destroying yourself. So the principle of co-agency implies that we are co-creators. It relies on the recognition that we are interdependent in a balanced biodiversity. So it is that principle of co-agency that Ubuntu encourages. The awareness that our interdependence, that personhood moves beyond the relationship between humans and humans, but a relationship between humans and non-humans, precisely because we are implicated in their lives and they are implicated in our lives. Even in the West, which thrives on the principle of individualism, there's a sense in which they agree that they're fundamental, basic human rights that each one of us owes to the community. I always like to make a distinction between individuality and individualism. Individuality gives you a sense of independence and freedom and also a development of your own personal character. Individualism, to the contrary, is self-referential. It is about you, me, all the times. And the ego always takes over. In all human societies, the way we temper the personal ego, communities moderate those by constantly reminding you that you are not living in isolation. You belong to a family, you belong to a broader community, you belong to a community of your peers, and you also belong to the world, and you have a responsibility for that world. If you get, too implicated in your subject, then you end up sounding like a missionary. I don't want to sound like a missionary. What Ubuntu has taught me, in a very profound way, is to realize that some of what we call banished knowledges or indigenous knowledge systems that we have here in Africa and in many other parts of the world, that there is value in some of these knowledges, and that perhaps if we want to reimagine the society of the future, then there's a sense in which a value system like Ubuntu can teach us, one, our mutuality, secondly, our conviviality as a people. Let me go back to our history in South Africa here. And, the emergence, or shall I say re-emergence of Ubuntu was at a very, very critical moment in the history of this country. We were moving from a repressive past and into a democratic dispensation. The issue then, how do we move the society forward? How do we reconstitute a new South Africa? And this was popularized by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He came up, he realized that we can dig into our past and find a value system that can help us to achieve redress, restorative justice, forgiveness, and also healing. Among the African communities, around, there are important rituals, birth, death. You'll always find communities coming together to support each other. Just like a ritual of greeting. It took me time to understand why people insisted that they have to be greeted. When I was at the University of the Witwatersrand, every time I was taking a break from my work, I would go downstairs at the cafeteria to buy some food. And sometimes I was so intense that I would not see the person that is serving me. I just go there and say, chicken pie. And she looks at me, chicken pie. Then she would respond, sawubona, basically forcing me to realize that I am not recognizing her. So recognition is fundamental. As Mother Teresa used to tell us, compassion is useless without action or application. Ubuntu is about the idea of acting. If you empathize, then go out and share with the vulnerable among us, with the weak among us. If you care, go out and make sure that our environment is not degraded, it is protected. Make sure that we have a responsibility, for our universe and for other people. There's a fascinating story that I got, from a friend of mine that works in the Amazon. That when the indigenous people in the Amazon, when they go fishing and they catch too much fish, they throw back some because of the awareness that the river feeds them, is a source of life.
If you could give me one word to summarize what Ubuntu means to you, what would it be?
Ultimately, interdependence.
And I think it's just so powerful, that video, and that philosophy of Ubuntu and that interconnectedness. I think we need to be thinking about how all of our actions do play interplay with each other. And we want to just make sure that we're walking with people and just not walking by people. We want to be lifting people up through this work. And I think by investing in authentic voice, we need to be thinking about, okay, so how do we do this at that local level? How do we make that change that enables us to be caring whilst we're doing this? And we do need the correct infrastructure to be able to do this safely and properly. The key thing here is having that support. So I know that, the fact that you've come along today, I think is, testament to the fact that you have an interest in that authentic voice and doing it properly. But I also know that a lot of you will probably have this as an add-on to your existing roles. It tends to be with that authentic voice that it's not a specific role for a lot of people, but it's someone with a passion for embedding voice of whoever their service users, their residents, etc., that are within their services, and they want to do that work. So we need to be looking at how do we support people properly through the process in a way that means that they can come and give their voice and they feel held, and they're able to debrief afterwards. They're able to manage anything that might have been triggering at that time for them in sharing their voice, and also just being able to talk through what they actually want to share. What's going to be the outcome of sharing? What's the benefit of this for me? And so all that support is necessary. Chris mentioned this earlier as well around feedback loops and how we develop those, because that's so important. We absolutely don't want to just be taking survivors' experiences and then them not hearing back what was the point of that. Then you're just taking from people. So that needs to be built into the work. Again, kind of before we start the work, it needs to be a conversation with whoever you're working with as to how do you want to hear back, but equally making that feasible for you as a service. What can we feasibly do with all the time constraints that we know that come with that frontline working and working with people in that really fast-paced environment. So kind of offering things like, okay, do you want a phone call? Would you like a small version of the report? Would you like it in an email? Whatever way is going to work best for that person and also for you as a service, but kind of managing that accessibility of the feedback that they're going to receive. And really importantly as well as that remuneration, we've mentioned this as well, and this is really key to addressing that power dynamic with survivor work. So it puts everyone on the same footing as each other in the room. That remuneration should be set at an amount that recognises that commitment, that expertise that survivors are bringing, and equally that risk to themselves as well that they're bringing, because we've got to remember that this takes a toll. This kind of work does take a toll on people. So not only are they bringing their expertise, but they are also taking that personal risk as well as part of their recovery journey. And equally, they don't know from day to day. We just don't know how things are going to affect us differently at different times. And so that's why as well that remuneration is so important. I think it's also really worth remembering that whilst remuneration is really important, we need to be thinking of doing that in a way that also doesn't affect the person that you're working with. So it might be that vouchers are the most appropriate way to pay a survivor because we don't want to affect their benefits and all those things like that. We also might consider where monetary remuneration isn't possible potentially within service with tight budgets, but what can we give back to survivors? What would they want? What do they need from us? Is there training that we can send them on? Is there an experience that they can have? Is there other events that we can take them to? So there are other ways of remunerating, but that needs to be agreed. And as long as that remuneration as well is on that kind of footing that, you know, that expertise they're bringing is valued. Next slide, please, Chris. And further to what we need in terms of investing in authentic voice, we need that organisational level of buy-in. I touched on this already in terms of, you know, we often just have that as an individual person really wanting to drive forward that authentic voice, but that needs to be recognised at an organisational level so that it can be prioritised. There can be that real fear of capacity and the ability to do this work properly, and then people just don't do it. And so if we all buy into it and we all take ownership of how do we embed that voice at an organisational level, and how are we going to listen to that, that's what's really important. We need to know that if we are bringing survivors, for example, to feed into some work that might be on offer, that's going to be valued and it's going to be heard and it will be implemented. We don't, again, want it to be a tick box exercise. So part of some of the kind of resources that Chris might be touching on later, we can go through, you know, that importance of almost doing like a checklist, essentially, of thinking about why do we want to hear from survivor voice and what's the outcome going to be. This also kind of leads into those partners and stakeholders as well. So I think in terms of capacity, we know that there is very limited capacity in the front line, particularly in the domestic abuse sector. So it's around really highlighting the importance of having authentic voice coordinators or participation coordinators, whatever they end up being called in the area. Essentially, those people who are able to support and embed that authentic voice in the system, that needs to be held up as a valuable role, and that needs to be commissioned as a role, so that you are not losing that voice if one person who just has it as an add-on to their day job moves on. It needs to be something that is always there, and that person and that role in particular can hold that space. And we also need to be aware that just because you have an authentic voice coordinator or whoever, like domestic abuse champions, survivor voice facilitators, even if you have these roles, it is also the responsibility of all the organisations to be thinking in a proactive way to kind of gather this voice, to embed that voice, and to think of opportunities for survivors to have within that system. Because without that, you know, again, that voice just disappears and it just goes into nothing and it becomes tokenistic. Right, next slide, Chris. I think this is still me. Oh, no, it's not me. Am I passing on to you to do a mentee? Oh, it's me. Apologies. So in terms of language, what we want to do in terms of setting up those safe spaces, we want to remember there's no them and us. So we want to remember that there's going to be professionals in the room that have got lived experience, but equally, if you're bringing survivors into these spaces, they might not be used to the jargon that we use or the acronyms that we use. I know that people, I mean, even, you know, even within the sector, there are acronyms that are thrown around that people forget. So we've got to be really mindful of how we're making these spaces accessible and not feeling that hierarchy and that power imbalance within the room. And this can come down to things like job titles as well. So if everyone's going around the room and kind of saying, oh, this is who I am, this is the job I have, this is who, you know, how important I sound, essentially, you're kind of shutting down the voices of people who might not feel used to being in those spaces. We've got to remember that we're all just human, and sometimes we just get very used to the ways that we speak in different meetings. But actually, the reality is, you know, day to day, that's just not how we talk. So it's about kind of bringing that down a little bit and just getting back to basics so that everyone can be involved in those conversations and bring the value into the room that they've got. And also that really feeds into being trauma informed, you know, being aware of who's in the room, professionally challenging that victim blaming language, and making sure that we're all holding ourselves to account to the best standard. Because it's understandable that we can get particularly, you know, that vicarious trauma, we can get particularly jaded with the system and how it works, and we can all get tired, and we understand that. But that's the value of clinical supervision, having good line management and supervision as well. And like I say, kind of supporting each other through this really challenging work so that we're not allowing that to seep into the you know, perceptions that we might have of people. As well as this, we need to be thinking in terms of like those power dynamics as well that I've mentioned. We need to have that partnership approach. So making sure that relationship is 50-50. we don't want to be using language where we know we've got a good relationship with a survivor that you may be working with and say, oh, do you know what, I really need you to do this piece of work, this will be really good. Because again, you're putting pressure on someone to kind of complete some consultation, which invariably, people tend to do things because if you've got a relationship with someone, there may well be that power imbalance again, where that pressure is there, even if it was completely unintentional on your side. So it's about being mindful of how we present pieces of work, knowing that people if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. But it's having the opportunity to do so. Because it might just not be something that's within their interests. And that's why it's really important to be constantly thinking of those kind of creative options for people and what might interest someone that they want to come and speak on, or certain ways they might want to give that feedback. And now it actually is Chris's turn.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, what we're gonna do is do a little mentoring. We want you to explore your own practice. So it's not, oh, sorry, I don't know why that keeps coming up in the middle of my thingy. So it's not necessarily what you think could happen. We want you to really reflect on your own practice and reflect what you can offer survivors of domestic abuse in your role. So what we want you to do is go to Menti. Hopefully people have used Menti before. So all you need to do is get your smartphone out and go to that QR code and go to Menti. Or if you're on a laptop or computer and you want to go to menti.com and use the code, when you go onto Menti, it'll say which code do you want to use. That's the code you want to use, 5658942. And what we want you to do, we've got a set of 3 questions about what you want to do. So I'm going to come out of this now. I'm going to stop sharing. Sarah, our wonderful project manager, is going to then share the Menti because otherwise I mess everything up. So if you can take a picture of that QR code or get on Menti now, I'll come out and then and then the questions should come up on your phone and stuff or your computer. So I'll stop sharing and let Sarah do her thing.
And it is also in the chat in case anyone wasn't able to scan that QR code.
So I just want you to have a think about what are the barriers you have experienced when hearing from people with lived experience. Okay, so what are the things that might have stood in your way? Just type in your responses if that's okay, and we'll cover a few of them as they come through. Right, okay, so they're starting to come through now. Thank you. So getting people to participate, getting varied voices, participation again, knowing where to signpost, recruiting. Well done for putting that in, bunny ears. That's good. We've started, and it's an interesting that you put recruiting in because we've started using the term selecting when it comes to sort of lived experience and speaking to people and having conversations about, because recruiting does feel a little bit, and I can't put my finger on what recruiting means, but it's almost, I don't know how it feels, almost adds something a little bit odd to the idea that we're recruiting you into this, into this lived experience panel. So we've started using the term selecting. So it's interesting that you put it in bunny ears, which I quite like. Language, trust, fear, previously let down, absolutely. Providing specialist support, having a diverse perspective. Oh, thank you, Sarah, for going down. That's great. Using the correct language, you're not using the word victim. And that's really interesting as well when we talk about sort of utilizing different words and terminologies. And that's certainly when we set up panels, that's certainly something that is explored. What would you rather be? Sort of termed as a group of people? Would you rather be a group of survivors, or would you rather be seen as the panel or victims? It's a conversation that you need to have, because everyone's slightly different with regards to that, because some people will say, I am a victim, I've always been a victim, and I will continue to be a victim. But some people like the term survivor, that they've survived the abuse. It's part of their healing process. It's part of that sort of resurgence in their life of wanting to make change moving forward. So they prefer the sort of survivor side of things. So I think it's really important that have that conversation. The language will be different in lots of different with lots of different people. Raising topics at the right time. Yeah, that's really interesting around, because sometimes as a facilitator of sort of hearing voices, you're in that middle sort of where the voices are wanting to be heard and you're getting pressure about what sort of things they want, you know, local authority or service or organizational sort of values, what they want to hear. The you know, victim survivors are saying, as a panel, we want to talk about this, but you're getting pressure from this side of things. So it's really hard to sometimes manage that. So that's a really good point. Raising topics, ensuring all intersecting barriers are taken into consideration. Absolutely, yeah. A mixture of people with different lived experiences in the same room. I always think that's really interesting. And that example there around sort of sexual abuse and the idea around VOG panels and domestic abuse panels being a little bit different. So what might that look like? I mean, specifically where, you know, we sort of work on domestic abuse panels and domestic abuse lived experience. But that idea that a lot of things are being almost shoveled into the VOG sort of strategies or the VOG sort of side of, you know, politics and stuff like that. There's a bit of a sort of a, you know, a sort of a tricky dynamic to manage there. So I think that's a really important one to have a discussion about, around sort of violence against women and girls sector and what that looks like, and, you know, sharing different experiences that a group of people that might be sat on a domestic abuse panel might not have wanted to be involved in, might be triggering, you know, those sorts of things. So I think that's really, really important to look at. Concerns around re-traumatizing, absolutely, around the language and stuff, really important. Some of those are fantastic, by the way. Thank you so much. On to the next question, if that's all right. Do you want to do this one, Charlie? Do you want me to?
I can do.
You do this one then, that's fine by me.
So what creative ways could you incorporate survivor voice into your practice? I could all wait for people to use their brains on this one, because it's creative has thrown a spanner in the works, I think.
We'll just while you're thinking of these as well, we will put these ideas that you've just talked about on the resource that we send out to you, alongside the, you know, the videos and the I think we're sending the PowerPoint out, aren't we, Charlie?
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll put what you've these ideas around barriers and how to work around them, and the recording of this to you as well.
I like this one coming in. So yeah, commissioning of services. So I think it's just so important, isn't it? I think, to develop services around the people who are going to be using them. And how does that work? Interview processes for staff, absolutely. I think we start to see that more and more often now, I think, which is brilliant, where you get to see that kind of the service users are on the panel, which is ideal. Co-producing policies and procedures, absolutely. Ensuring that collaborative practice, in my role, ensuring they're involved at every stage, such as safety and support planning, and ensuring this is tailored to their needs. I mean, exactly, like, especially that frontline working, talking to them, just like using all their experiences about their own life in how can they best support themselves. Guidance on completing case studies for staff, absolutely, kind of really feeding into that process rather than just taking those case notes, talking to someone, what would you like to bring from your case notes? Yeah, shifting the power by ring fencing roles for service users. I think that's a lovely one. And it's like, actually, do you know what can you bring, and also how can you upskill people who have been coming to your service and all that value that they bring to the service? Mystery shoppers, yes, I like that one. That's nice and creative as well. Beginning of new projects and programs, I think, absolutely. I think if we're able to get that voice in right from the start, and I think that's where I saw that on the last answers around time. We know that time really has to be built in to do this properly. Survivor advisory board, so establish a board where survivors provide ongoing feedback and shape programs, and peer mentorship programs. So yeah, pairing survivors with similar situations. Absolutely. I mean, I don't know how often, you know, you hear that just by having someone else who's been through similar experiences, it just helps people feel not alone. And it's so important. And often, actually, when you set up panels or you set up groups or focus groups, you will find anyway that they will naturally kind of gravitate towards each other and form that kind of supportive network, which is just, you know, it's a lovely kind of little side outcome of doing this work as well. Yeah, frequent reflection on practice. It's like, how many times can someone feed into it actually? And we don't want to do it just at the end, kind of, well, how are you at the beginning and how are you at the end? We should be doing that right throughout the process, because what do you need me to change about my practice? How can I help you in a way that suits you? Yeah, and co-producing literature and resources, absolutely, because we just write things sometimes, and like Chris said, you know, they rewrote that strategy, and now it actually speaks to them. You know, actually they can understand what that is. The amount of times as well we've written things like surveys or, you know, consent forms, and then we'll share that with change makers or young people, and they're like, nope, that doesn't mean a thing. So you just need to go back to the drawing board, and that's why it's really important. Utilize the expertise of our rights and participation service. Yeah, absolutely, particularly around that voice of the child. I think the voice of the child is often so hidden, isn't it? So we need to be finding those really interesting, exciting ways that children and young people can feed into the process. It needs to be exciting as well. They can't just be boring. I think we all get bored by meetings, so let's make them better anyway for children and young people. Let's make them more exciting and engaging. Brilliant. Lots of lovely ideas.
I think I quite like the one at the top as well. I don't know if you touched on it
Yeah.
around interviewing sort of potential practitioners. I think it says it was one of the first ones, and I think, I mean, in Safe Lives we do that sort of interview processes for staff. That was it within Safe Lives. So we've just had interviews for our board of trustees. That's sort of the, you know, the top dog within the charity sort of sectors. You know, board of trustees sort of sits there around that. And we had both change makers, which is young people, and pioneers that were involved in those interview processes. We also have pioneers on the board of trustees, and we're going through the process of having conversations with the change makers within Safe Lives around sitting on that board of trustees as well, and they'll be interviewed for that by other people with lived experience, because we see it's so important. And if it's we want to talk about it from the bottom up, you know, hearing from panels and hearing from people with lived experience, but we also want it from the top down as well. You know, I'll talk about that when we sort of go into implementation a little bit. Sorry, next question. We need to speed up a little bit, I think, don't we? Need to be a bit speedy, don't we?
You know.
So what do you think your local area needs to elevate survivor voice? And I think, you know, think creatively, and we know resource and we know time, you know, are going to be two of the main sort of answers on this, but just think about anything sort of around that, around sort of what do you think your local area needs to elevate survivor voice? Yeah, vocal backing. I'm going to talk about visibility in a minute, and what that looks like, because it's really important. Vocal backing from the leads, from the people that the decision makers.
Yeah. And educating, it's really important, isn't it? Just understanding what's the value in this? How do we do this well? I've seen that a lot as well in your answers, kind of how are we educating services to do this safely? And that is really important. And I think that's as well down to how potentially authentic voice coordinators or, you know, facilitators are there to find the safest way as well for someone to feed in that voice. We need to find out, are the services ready to hear that? And if there's a safer way of us feeding that voice in, then we'll, you know, manage it that way. Yeah, awareness raising to organizations on the benefits of embedding voice. Yeah, some webinars like this, thanks. So we'll be having this on our Echo website as well, so this will be readily available for anyone to share and to watch again and again. So I'm going to move on because I'm conscious of time, but thank you so much for your participation in that.
I need to go back to sharing, don't I? That's what I need to do. Bump. Okay.
And so I think really this next slide is just around kind of tying up that end there.
All right. Yeah.
I know you're fine. For opportunities for survivors. So, you know, we've seen a lot of these ideas, all those things kind of coming up. So in terms of presentations, do you know what I mean? Giving people the opportunity to do activities and learn new skills that they may want to do. And I think it's just throwing those questions out there, and also being mindful to kind of keep offering this like different things, because it might be that at one point they absolutely don't want to be doing public speaking, but you know, we've even seen it within our change makers as well, the growth in some of them, and that now kind of actually feeling able to speak publicly in like strategic spaces, which is just incredible. And Chris will always do his proud dad face whenever he's watching the change makers grow and do new amazing things. So actually, just by continuing to offer these opportunities, yeah, we might be able to get some different kind of interaction from survivors. Passing on to you again, Chris.
Yeah, cheers. Proud dad face. Just going to talk quickly about, we've only got sort of 10 minutes left, so I do apologise. Just want to sort of whip through some of the practicalities around implementation of victim survivor voice within your local area, just to give you some ideas about where to start. 'Cause it might be sitting there thinking, I want to do this, but I don't really know where to start. I don't know how to cover some of the things that I think might come up. And because we sort of deal with survivor voice a lot around the country, lots of different things do come up a lot of the time. So we sort of have different ideas around how to think about these things before they happen almost. So the first one that we would talk about would be the accessibility checklist, which is used in Scotland for their authentic voice service up there. And this is really when somebody sort of tells you, you know, I really want to be part of some, you know, a group or having my voice heard. This is where these sorts of things is where you might be able to start, so they can attend meetings, so you know who sort of the level of language that they can use, what their contact preferences might be. Do you need a translator? If you're gonna remunerate, what does that look like for them? And just, you know, talking about, I know Charlie mentioned it earlier on remuneration, but one of the areas that we worked in, they utilised gym memberships locally. So a couple of the victim survivors that were involved in a panel didn't want to be paid because it would have messed with their income, whichever way their income was coming. So they asked to have their gym membership, which was a similar amount to the remuneration, paid every month. And that was their way of saying thank you, and they got free gym membership, and they worked off. So it's those sort of creative ideas around remuneration that can really benefit different people. But really, when you're thinking about sort of starting off, you need to remember that participation work is really varied. I just mentioned sort of making it visible. The more visible the work with survivors is, the more it can affect change. And that's really, really important. Sort of getting this out there to decision makers, getting it to partnership boards, getting it to operational meetings or strategic meetings, having those conversations with your manager about how can we get this heard far and wide around your local area. Having that sort of impartiality as well. So we know that sometimes funding comes with its outputs and outcomes, that we need you to really think about that. But as a facilitator or an authentic voice coordinator, whatever your role might be, being impartial in how that information is gathered and how that information is fed back, and the impact, being really impartial in that, having that partnership approach that Charlie mentioned, and sort of talking through that, you know, we're not here to influence your strategic direction or funding. It should be the other way around, and that's how we want to work it. Make sure as you sort of set it up, it's known that it's, you know, this isn't a therapeutic group or a support mechanism. Those sorts of conversations do naturally come up. But what we've found in the work that we've done in a lot of local areas, that some people that have joined are not at the right stage in their recovery to sort of manage some of the triggers that are associated with some of the work that's done, if that makes sense. So sometimes it's some people at different, everyone's always at different stages of their journey, but I think it's really important that sort of the expectations there, that it isn't a support group. We have set up other things like WhatsApp groups and something called Band as well within the work that we do. However, you've got to be really conscious of what those look like as well, and who facilitates that. If it's a work phone that you're working off and you're facilitating that, everyone needs to know that you shut your phone off at 5 and have boundaries around that. Similarly, if they want to have conversations, and it might be they want to have conversations about, you know, something on the telly, they might want to have conversations about a particular piece of work that's going on, but there needs to be some boundaries around that as well. You can't have people messaging at 2 a.m. because they're still awake at 2 a.m. thinking about things, but they're triggering other people that might be trying to sleep, stuff like that. Whereabouts do you want this voice to be heard as well is really, really important. So do you want them to be at strategic boards? Do you want the work to impact communities? So really thinking about what that looks like, because you can have very different ideas about where you want this to go, and also thinking about sort of the power, safety and risk, and considering that all the time as well. A couple of other sort of practical elements. So we've got a piece of work on communication here. So always think about consent and impact. We've talked about that and feeding that back. Always think about safeguard. So for children and people, we consent for them and consent for the parents, risk assessment forms, financial assessment, checklists, safeguarding with regards to safety planning, best time to contact, understanding intersectionality, communication. And this is a communication form that we've used before. So I'm at my best when, ways in which I like to communicate. I can add the most value when, those sorts of things really help with sort of intersectionality and equity of voice. Are we really hearing all the voices? Where is that information going to go? Who's going to hold it? How long are they going to hold it for? Is everyone having that equal opportunity? Really important sort of ideas as well. I'm not going to touch on trauma. I'm sure you've sort of talked about trauma-informed practice quite a lot within things, but really wanted to just sort of highlight trauma-informed practicalities around safety, trustworthiness, transparency, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. So I really want to, just really think about those when you're going into the work that you do. And then just think about sort of feedback loops. So who to involve at what point and why. And I realise we've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to race through this quickly, because this feedback loop sort of tells us, because at any point on those 5 things, if you don't have survivor or victim voice feeding into the project, then the project might as well not run. So who to involve and why. If you're not having survivor voice there at the who to involve and why, then there's no point in running, because you're going to think from a professional's point, a professional's background. When you're preparing and planning, if you're not having victim survivor voice in there at that point, then you're going to prepare and plan different things. During the project, obviously have the voice in there. After the project, you need that feedback. You need to know what you've done right, what you've done differently, what are the gaps, what can we do differently next time? And you need that reflection as well to really help with how you implement any of the findings, but also how you approach the next piece of work. And that starts again at who to involve and why. So that's really important. Just sort of think about that feedback loop and think about what that might look like at all times. Sorry. I mean, we've talked about barriers a little bit, so I'm all right. I don't need to read that one off. I just want to give you a few minutes for sort of any questions and stuff like that, if that's all right. Is that okay with you, Charlie? Just sort of.
Yeah, absolutely. Winding down now. In the chat, we've also got a link to our feedback form, and we'd just be really grateful to hear from you regarding the session. There's also an opportunity within that feedback form as well to kind of feed into, is there any other training that you'd like to see as part of the ECHO project that we're rolling out in Bolton, Sheffield and Leicestershire, because we want to be really responsive to what you need in the area as well. I'll give you a couple of seconds to kind of click on that, and then also, yeah, like I say, it's in the link. No, we'll be really grateful. So we've got a few minutes for any kind of questions that you might have regarding things we've said. I've seen a couple in the chat.
Do you want to pop that up? You
can put that up now as well. So there was one in the chat, Chris, around the strategy that you mentioned that was rewritten. Is that available to be available online or anywhere?
Not at the moment, no. It's a work in progress. So what's happened with regards to the strategy is that there was various elements of it that didn't make that. So children and young people didn't even have a section in the strategy. They were under sort of almost like an additional voices section. So that's been removed, and children and young people now have their own section. The entire forward was taken out and redone by the and that forward was written by the head person and was redone, but it's not available yet because it's a work in progress. So it's an ongoing strategy at the moment. So it's not been publicised, but because I have oversight of that project, I know sort of where it's up to, and they are rewriting lots of different bits of it. I think it'll be used as a piece of good practice in the future. I couldn't tell you when it'll be complete, but I think it'll be used. We would quite like to use it, and I think the local area that we're working with would probably quite like to see it being used nationally as well as a piece of good practice and co-production of strategies. So watch this space. It's not available at the moment, I'm afraid.
I think it's also, just while we've got a couple of minutes before we wrap up and let everyone get on with the rest of their days, just a reminder that there's been a couple of my colleagues, Chloe and Bev, have put their email in the chat. We've also, on the slides that we send out, we've also got our email address for the project. So if there's anything you want to do in terms of getting in touch with us for any survival work, please do. We are absolutely all ears and we'd love to work with you. But thank you very much for coming along today.
Thank you very much, everyone.